If someone had told me several months ago that I was going to start making YouTube videos and start streaming Fate Grand Order, I never would have believed them. But given how we're all locked inside, it's probably for the best I pick up a few new hobbies before I go completely stir crazy. So, here I am. However, I do not want my first video to just be me slapping a stream up onto YouTube and calling that a day. Because guess what? That's boring. So, what is my grand first video to try and break into the Fate Grand Order scene? Let's take a look. I'm going to kill my YouTube channel before it starts. I've been playing Fate Grand Order for quite some time, starting at around the first Halloween event, and have been playing consistently ever since. If there are two things I have ever learned, is that the gacha is indeed out to get you, Gatako is right, and there is no such thing as when black keys are not being on rate up. If there is a third, however, that I have learned, it is that people in the Fate community love Jalter. So, why exactly is this? Well, if I would be perfectly honest, big breasted goth girlfriend. And that's probably all I would need to say. But that's boring and doesn't make for anything remotely close to a good analysis video. So, why does the Fate player base love Jalter? Well, Jalter is one of the first villains we come across in Fate, in the Orleans Singularity. This position, as the first major threat we face, outside of Fuyuki, gives her a very interesting position. Her effect on the world is incredibly apparent, simply due to her drowning the entire world, or at least all of Orleans, in dragons. And what servant she does summon, she gives madness enhancement. So, yeah. Not only do we have a witch spawning an army of dragons, but we also have every class as a berserker. An interesting idea in theory that swiftly turns south. Because you either have servants that are more focused on keeping themselves alive, or ones that have a lesser understanding of retreat than the Imperium of Man. And that's not the only reason why I think Jalter's popular. In fact, she, as far as the villains go, is one of the least intimidating. I'm going to be honest here. Jalter is not that intimidating. Yeah, sure, we see her armies sweep across France in a tide of blood and violence, but honestly, from what we see of her, she just seems to act like an edgy teenager more than anything else, and one that only has 1980s Skeletor for reference in that department. And by this point, we have already been introduced to Professor Leave, however you pronounce that, who has consigned our boss, Aloga Mary, to a fate far worse than death by the obliteration of her soul, which he also, slight spoiler, may have done a bit worse than that. And a few singularities later, we encounter Solomon, who is so powerful that it does not matter whether he kills us or not. That's how insignificant we are to his plans. And not only that, he's right. Nothing we do to him matters, no matter how many Herculeses we throw at him. And even before our final showdown with him, we face Tiamat, the mother of all that lives. laughs. Sorry, Jalter, but I don't think a little dragon witch running around is nothing compared to this. And even bad enough for Jalter, she doesn't really matter at the end of the day, cause the person pulling the strings is Gilda Ray's. Jalter isn't her own unique being. She is just a look-alike of Jalter, of the original Joan of Arc, except completely revolving around vengeance. So we so she's not even fully a person. She's a failed knockoff copy who can't even do what she was originally meant to do, which is honestly kind of sad because she goes out thinking she's all of Jalter's anger and rage towards the world, and when she's never that in the first place. Yeah, after that, we do see her in a brief gag in the first Christmas event, where she tries to take Santa Saber Alter's job, but there's a joke about how she would need to be a small child in what is either Natsu versus either pure attempt of drugs or him being very blunt with his foreshadowing. Take your pick on which that is, and trust me, this is actually important. Her first real appearance, Jalter's, is during the Da Vinci and the Seven Counterfeit Heroic Spirits event, which had a disturbing absolute lack of a Da Vinci servant. The Lightworks, come on. Alright, and I do not really remember this event all too well, which is kind of a shame because we had a rerun of the event recently in North America. But what I do remember is Jalter breaks into Da Vinci's workshop, produces 7 counterfeits of heroic spirits, and then proceeds to wreak havoc. Also, these counterfeit heroic spirits may or may not be a harem, as pointed out by Emiya. I do distinctly remember that gag and Jalter's reaction to that. So, what exactly does this have to do with Jalter being popular? Well, she picked up quite a bit of following in Orleans, which is the first chapter of the first major real obstacle in our story. And that following likely grew over time. She's also a tsundere, which, as we all know, are pretty popular. And even though she was a major antagonist during that singularity, that hasn't stopped other servants in that position from amassing a similar following. Note me and the others that want a summonable Tiamat. But Fate Grand Order players can be, well, stringent. They're going to want something with power and effectiveness compared to, just a pretty face. So how does Jalter stack up in that regard? Yeah, she stacks up very, very well. She is currently the holder of the highest attack in the entire game, which makes her overall the strongest neutral beat stick one has available. Though this is compensated with low health, her high attack stat is, for the foreseeable future, the highest in the entire game. And her skills are pretty solid as well. Self-modification at rank EX gives a 3-turn buff on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown, which increases her crit damage by 50% at max level and gives 800% additional star absorption, which is, both of these effects are quite good and why she is considered such a strong crit servant. Despite her low star weight, the bonus to absorption most certainly helps, though it still can prove less than sufficient if you have riders in your team. Then there's Dragon Witch EX, which provides a double charisma buff, again on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown, so decent synergy with self modification. This also provides a second 20% attack buff to all dragon type allies. That's the only real downside to this skill, as far as I'm concerned, and has been repeated by many, is that Jalter herself does not have the dragon trait, which prevents her from making full effectiveness of it. However, a lot of other servants with double charisma skills, like Liz or the Archer of Shinjuku, are excluded from their double charisma buffs, so they may or may not have put that in for balancing reasons. But anyway, her last skill is Ephemeral Dream, which is not on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown, instead being on an 8 to 6. Gives her 1 turn of increased buster performance up to 50%, gives her invul for 1 turn, and deals 1,000 points of damage to herself as a health demerit, though this can not kill her. This, given that Jalter barely has more than 11,000 health at max level, Ephemeral Dream can quickly rack up damage that simply cannot be shrugged off, and Jalter's just not that tanky in the first place, even with her class neutrality against most of the game. Her passive skills are also quite strong, with Avenger B increasing her own MP generation rate when taking damage by 18%, but at the cost of reducing her allies' debuff resistance by 8%, Oblivion Correction, which further emphasizes her Buster Crit roll, and Self-Replenishment, which charges her Noble Phantasm gauge by 4%. These are fairly standard. Lastly, her Noble Phantasm, Le Grandement de la Haine, is a single target nuke that inflicts curse for 5 turns depending on overcharge, and applies the buff block for 1 time for an indeterminate amount of turns. I'd also like to mention this, despite being an anti-army class Noble Phantasm, it only does damage to a single target. Why is this a thing, Delightworks? Why? In a vacuum, Jalter is pretty strong, though also flawed. This is mostly due to her already low health, needing to choose in between using Ephemeral Dream for either more survivability, which I put in quotations because it also slowly kills her, or for damage, not being able to fully utilize her double charisma, and while the Avenger class is potent, it suffers from incredibly niche class advantage. Avengers only have advantage against 2 classes. They share a regular sub-triangle with rulers, doing times 2 damage from them and taking half. But for berserkers, they share the same thing everyone does, except for foreigners. And yeah, sure, Jalter is probably going to win in a straight-up punching contest with most berserkers, because Avengers will hit as hard as a berserker hits them, but there is a decent bit of risk involved when you decide to point 2 glass cannons directly at one another. But what if I told you there was a servant that could make all of Jalter's weak points vanish, while at the same time fixing and further improving upon her strengths? That character is Hans Christian Andersen. No, it is not. Yeah, it's Merlin. It's actually Merlin. It was always going to be Merlin. Yeah. Double Merlin supporting Jalter is disgustingly broken. When you combine their buffs, you have a 60% attack buff, 150% buster buff, and a 250% increase to critical damage. And that's not even including that Merlin has a party-wide invul skill, an MP that provides additional MP charge, stars, healing. Yeah, but this isn't a Merlin video. All you need to know is that Merlin makes Jalter stupidly strong, and her massive crits takes them to the point where class advantage is a suggestion, and one that Jalter bullied and took lunch money from. But how do I measure Jalter's popularity? Well, I could just grab every single Fate Grand Order member, take their phone, and just see how many Jalters they have in their support lists, but honestly, I don't want to rack up an assault charge making this video. So, instead, I have chosen a different method. Welfares. With the sole exception of Liz and her mini Liz faces, there is only one other servant that has more than one welfare version of themselves. No credit for guessing who. It's Jalter. Jalter has two alternate versions. First, from Christmas 2, Jalter, the Santa dressed Lancer, who, honestly, I have no idea what to think of the existence other than what type of drugs were you on. And then we have Summer Jalter, or for me, the biggest surprise I ever got. Because when Archer John for Summer 3 was released as the 5-star for the first banner, I was like, okay, Jalter is obviously going to be the 5-star for Banner 2. About that. Instead, they give us another Jalter completely free as an event welfare. They could have printed her as a 5-star and just made money. There's no other way. They would just have a license to print money. That's how much money the Lightworks would be making if Summer Jalter was a 5-star. I mean, the fact they give us two versions of her is a testament to just how popular Jalter is. So, in conclusion, Jalter's popularity is due to a combination of prior connections that were made in story, with an appearance that charmed several players. Her power as a servant only added to this, which could only exponentially increase due to her crystal perfect synergy with one who still remains to be the best servant, even in JP. And I will repeat my first point. Big busted goth girlfriend.